Right, so this was one of my most anticipated reads of the year, and I was able to get an advanced copy. So my plan was to read it before the release date and post my review on the release date. And I was able to read it before the release date, but I just wasn't sure about my feelings, so I decided to wait a few days, and a few days became a few weeks. And I don't think it's going to change, so let's just talk about it. I really enjoyed The Night Circus. I thought it offered a very unique reading experience, and I have a video, 5 reasons why you should read The Night Circus and 5 reasons why you shouldn't. I would say that video pretty much applies to the Starless Sea as well, so if you're interested in that, I will link in the description. The bottom line with this book is I think if you enjoyed The Night Circus, you will probably enjoy this book as well, and if you didn't like The Night Circus, you probably won't like this book as well. Having said that, I don't think this book is as strong as The Night Circus. So the story is about Zachary, who finds a painted door when he's a kid, and he doesn't try to open the door as any sane person wouldn't. However, he always regrets not trying to open the door when he had the chance. Once he grows up, he finds a mysterious book in a library with no author. He starts reading the book, and one of the chapters in the book exactly describes the experience he had with the door in his childhood. So he gets curious and starts digging up, and he ends up discovering this magical library world. So it's basically about the group of people who are in that world versus the group of people who are trying to prevent people from getting into that world. In a nutshell, I'm trying not to give any spoilers. Let's talk about the cover of the book a bit. I actually prefer the UK cover to the US cover. The UK cover seems super elaborate, and it just sort of incorporates a lot of elements from the book. I like that it incorporates a lot of symbols from the book. It sort of feels like this handmade journal type of thing. Whereas the US version is a bunch of keys and ribbons. And I don't necessarily dislike the design. It is kind of a simpler approach, and I do like the design of it. But what I don't like is they just kind of use like Microsoft Word clip art keys and ribbons type of things. The assets they chose to use seem cheap to me. I don't really know how else to describe it. Again, like it's not really the design, but just the assets they chose to use. Maybe I'll just remake this cover with different assets because the cover itself can look good. However, these Microsoft Word clip art keys and ribbons just look really bad to me. I don't know what you think. Let me know your thoughts on this cover, but I love the UK cover, and that's the cover I ordered. It hasn't arrived yet. The book is very meta. It's about stories and it's about books. So if you're very bookish, if you love books, if you love libraries, you're more likely to find things that you will enjoy in this book. As with The Night Circus, there are a lot of detailed, beautifully written descriptions in this book. I would say this book is more written through character viewpoints. So that kind of super flowery writing doesn't always work for me. I think that kind of writing works better in omniscient narrators. When it's the point of view of characters, it feels a little bit off to me because people don't experience the world like that. Therefore, it feels to me like there's some level of pretentiousness happening when a character is describing the world in a super flowery language. There are multiple timelines. It's a little bit confusing to follow this book. I think I was able to follow it, but it took a lot of efforts. There are chapters at the present time with Ezra and what he is exploring and finding out. And there are chapters where we're reading from some of the books in this library. So the books in that library contain a lot of different stories. And the idea is those stories converge at some point. At the very beginning, the book introduces this incredibly interesting world. There are a lot of ancient rituals. There are a lot of symbols. It starts with introducing an acolyte. An acolyte is symbolized with a bee, and it sort of takes you through that ritual and how to become an acolyte. They're not allowed to speak. They lose their tongues. There are keepers who are represented with keys. There are guardians who are represented with a sword. And there's this whole ritual where like incredible sword designs, and then when you become a guardian, you get one of those sword designs specifically designed for you tattooed on your chest. That kind of wonderful, incredible world building, and it's just like so interesting. But then what they are guarding and what this world has to offer is incredibly vague. It gets to a point where it's just super self-important. Like it's all about stories. Like that pretentious moment in Game of Thrones when Tyrion is like, who has a better story than Bran, the broken kind of moment. There are so many rituals to get into the world, to get out of the world, to for people who are involved in this world, and the world itself is so interesting. One thing is we are experiencing this world when it's not at its prime. So we are getting glimpses of what it used to be. But even then, I was never quite sure what the significance of this world was, except for having a bunch of books and stories to read. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to have my own world with book nooks. And I would say this book is in 3 parts. The first part is more realistic part, and then there's this middle part where they're in this interesting world, and then there's the last part which is completely bonkers, which suddenly tons of random things start happening, and things do connect at some point, but I don't think the resolution is anywhere near satisfying. And I think this is partly because the way the book opens, because it opens with all those rituals and the history of the world and introduces you to all the roles, but then it feels like that wasn't that important, because then you go like, okay, so what were they really guarding here? As far as the characters go, Zachary is average, completely average character, and I couldn't tell you that I had any specific connection to any of the other characters. There are diaries of one character, and that character has a lot of personality, so that's maybe one character I sort of liked more than others. Another thing with the characters is at times they're just too cryptic. One of the characters just asks a very direct, simple question, and then the character just gives a super cryptic, weird answer, and that happens a lot. And it's hard when characters speak like that, because how are they ever going to form relationships with each other, let alone me feeling anything for them? That crypticness, sort of pretentious mysteriousness, took me out a little bit of this book. If you like fairy tales a lot, you might like this book, because it's like a convergence of multiple fairy tales to sort of complete the telling of a story. Whenever there's this story within story type of things happening, it's hard, because you may end up getting attached to one of the stories and not the others. And I think this is something that happens in this book. You might get attached to one of the stories that are less important than the others, and then you don't care about the others. I think that's what happened to me. I was just really interested in the lore of the world, when I usually am not really interested in lore, but this was just told so interestingly. However, after I passed that point, it was a little bit difficult for me to get through this book. I would constantly nap. I mean, it is a fairy tale book, so who can blame me? But I would just nap a lot. And as far as rating goes, I don't really know how to rate this, so I'm just gonna say read it if you like. It's kind of interesting. I rated 3 stars on Goodreads. I could have given it fewer. I could have given it more. It's just one of those books that's very hard to talk about. It definitely offers a particular experience, and I will most definitely pick up Erin Morgenstern's next book. I don't know if it's gonna be another 8 years. I can imagine how she writes. I talked about it in my Night Circus video as well. On the scale of plotters versus pantsers, I would say this author is like at the edge of pantsers. So I cannot imagine how many revisions, how many drafts this book went through in the past 8 years, but it is an interesting book, and you might want to check it out if what you heard sounds interesting. That's it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a like to let me know. And if you'd like to see me rambling more about books, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. I am complete. I am complete. I am